So, I've done a fair amount of material for networking people looking to get into programming, but not much for programmers trying to get into networking. So, I am hoping to go over a super high level overview of Layer 3 networking for programmers. So, the foundation of Layer 3 networking is an IP address. The idea being that each IP address in the world is unique. There's a few exceptions with that due to protocols like NAT, but all of those are the network's problem, not the programmers. Each device that's reachable over the network has at least one IP address, and when you start a session with something like google.com, what you're actually doing is saying, when you type google.com into your browser, the computer's going out saying, hey, someone just told me to go to a Google. What's a Google? And the internet will say, oh, he means this particular IP address. And then the computer says, oh, okay, I know what to do with an IP address. And then it starts sending packets out with the destination of that IP address. So what makes up an IP address? Well, it's made up of 32 bits, that is ones and or zeros. And the IP address is divided into two sections. There's the subnet address, also known as the network address. This is what gets passed around the network so that the routers and such know where the IP address is. And then there's the host address. This is the address of the individual device. And these are split up by the subnet mask. So unfortunately, that does not make a lot of sense without at least an example. So here's an example. Like I said, the IP address and subnet mask are made up of 32 ones and zeros. The subnet mask is, all that's doing is saying which of these bits is part of the host address and which of it is part of the subnet address. So, subnet address and network address being the same thing. So, if there is a 1 in the subnet mask with a corresponding bit in the IP address, that's just moving on down and becoming the network address. And then it just fills out the rest of the network address with zeros. So you have the network address, and up here you have this host address. So the IP address here is how you would normally see it. We're converting that 32-digit horrible monstrosity that you could never remember into full sections with 8 bits each, or 1 byte. And we convert each of those bytes into decimal. So in this case, it would be 192.168.0.1. The subnet mask is also often shown this way as 255, 255, 255, 0, and it also contains 24 ones, so the CIDR equivalent of that would be a /24. So if you wanted to say that this was 192.168.0.1 with a subnet of 255, 255, 255, 0, or you could say it's an IP address of 192.168.0.1 with a subnet mask of /24. It just makes things a little bit easier. I wouldn't worry too much about this because there is a library in Python with the called IP addresses. It's super helpful when doing all the work with these. So we're going to go over a short overview of the routing protocols. So the routing protocols are how the routers know where all these subnets actually live. There's lots of options. The ones you're most likely to run into are BGP. It's really good for huge networks like the internet. By default, it is very slow, taking several seconds or even several minutes to propagate a change. You have OSPF. It's an open standard, has some pretty strict topology requirements if you want to use some of the advanced features. You have EIGRP, which is Cisco only, but it has very loose topology features. And you have ISIS, which is an open standard. If you want to do a large network, there's a decent chance you use ISIS, but it's really fallen out of favor. You're much more likely to run into OSPF than ISIS. They each have their differences and their own ways to avoid routing loops. Basically, I just wanted you to have an idea that there is a protocol moving these subnets around so that everyone knows how to get to them, and that there are multiple options. So once again, there's some pretty good information in there, but not much actionable. So how does it actually work? Let's say that as a network administrator, I go in and give router 1 2 new subnets. So he goes out and tells his neighbors, hey, I just got these 2 new subnets. Router 2 is like, hey, really? That's cool. Let me put that in my routing routing table. At which point, router 2 now has that in his routing table, and he goes over and starts telling his friends. So router 3 is connected to router 2, and router 2's saying, hey, I just know someone who got those 2 new subnets. And router 3 also puts that in his routing table. And it just continues on like that until the entire network knows about those 2 new subnets. So that's how the routing table is populated. And when a packet comes in, it takes the most exact match for the path. So what does that look like? So someone just sent into router 3 a packet going to 1.1.1.5. So he's going to go through his routing table and look to see what the best path is. So he's going to say, oh, that first route, 0.0.0.0/0 is a default route, and that matches everything, but that's not very good. It matches everything, not just me. So let's see if I have something better. He looks at 1.1.2, and it's in a different subnet. He happens to have a route to 1.1/16, but that's still not great. Let's look and see if we have something better. We found 1.1.1/24, which is better than 16, so he will take that one before he takes the /16. And he looks at the 1.1.1.128, and he sees that that is not in his subnet. So he is going to go with the route to 1.1.1/24, which means he's going to R2. And with that, the packet goes from R3 to R2, and it just does the entire process over again. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you. Goodbye.